to class 3. And by the way, if you guys have any questions or would care to comment, feel free to write me at ross@rossbishop.com. I would love to hear from you. That's ross@rossbishop.com. Now, in the first 2 classes, we've looked into a role that conflict and harmony plays in our spiritual development. Today, we're going to investigate learning and how that happens, and the vital role that our inner child plays in controlling our lives. And we'll go into a couple of exercises to help with that process. Okay, so let's look at learning. Now, think about teaching an infant to walk. The child is capable. What she lacks is skill and experience and the self confidence that comes from that. Well, how is she going to get there? By a combination of missteps, mistakes, and sometimes getting it right. We call this learning. Now, to the child, walking is alien territory. So, what's her experience like? Some fear, then eventually satisfaction. There's no reason for her to trust the process except for your encouragement. And you create a safe environment in which she can learn. Besides, she sees you walking around, and that gives her faith that somehow she can do it too. Now, just to continue the analogy, the same thing is happening for you right now. Like the child, what is being asked of you is outside of your experience. You know compassion, but to live from it would be pretty much alien territory. And like the child learning to walk, you'll get there by sometimes getting it right, by being in harmony, and sometimes by screwing up and creating conflict. In other words, by learning. The difference is that unlike the child learning to walk, it doesn't feel like anyone is holding your hand. Now, that's not entirely true. It is true you had to learn this process on your own, or at least feeling like you were on your own. But he's been with you more than you realized. But that's a subject for us for another day. What's important is that you had to be open to the process. And we spend a good deal of energy fighting with that. Now, learning to live by compassion means feeling vulnerable. And like walking, it must be lived, experienced, and tested through the fires of hell until you learn that it's safe to live it. And that requires a significant leap of faith. So let's talk about making mistakes. Do something right, and frankly, hardly anyone notices. But screw up. Okay, so what is a mistake? Well, we can call it an error of judgment, but you don't consciously make mistakes. But the critic says you should have known better. Well, who's that voice? Who's the critic? Is that the voice of perfection? Well, hell, you're human. Good luck with that. Someplace in your history was an adult, a parent, teacher, minister, or maybe boys at school, whatever, who passed judgment that you weren't smart enough, or you couldn't sing, or you weren't pretty enough, etc., etc., etc. The point was something was wrong with you. Now, in my case, I had a piano teacher who pulled on my ear whenever I made a mistake. And I had earaches as a kid to begin with. Now, fortunately, we don't do that so much anymore, but the judgment of each other continues. Consider that half of all first marriages end in divorce. What clouded these people's judgment? Was it a lack of information? Did these people ignore what should have been obvious? Or were they acting from fantasies and their own neediness? See, we don't marry the person who's in front of us. We marry our idea of who they are. And then after a couple of years, we might fall in love with who they actually are or not. But remember that the Creator does not judge nor punish. If you want proof, look at the system He created for us. In life, you are bound to fail, and repeatedly. He designed that into the program so that we could learn. Your transformation depends on your learning, and that comes in large part from your conflicts and from making mistakes. Now, the trick, of course, is to minimize your failures. And when you do screw up, learn from your failure and then go on. By the way, that's one of the reasons we need other people in our lives. Your experiences, your lessons, come mainly from your interactions with other people. Now, look, always do your best. Okay. And the challenge is to move from self judgment and self recrimination to the truth. You were put here to learn, and making mistakes is how we learn and grow and develop. But you need to be smart about it. So please don't go around making dumb mistakes because there's no learning in those. Okay, so you made a mistake. Learn from it and go on. Don't wallow in it. That's just self punishment. Now, let's talk about some of your screw ups. I want you to take one of the difficult situations you can remember. And for the moment, forget what the issue was. What was going on for you? Now, what I want you to do is to recreate the situation, only do it without your woundedness. What changes? The tragedy is to have had an experience and learn nothing from it. Now, there's a Buddhist teaching. You are strong when you know your weaknesses. You are beautiful when you appreciate your flaws. You are wise when you learn from your mistakes. Forget the mistake. Remember the lesson. Now, I want to talk with you for a good bit today about your inner child. This is the most important relationship that you will ever have. And for most people, that relationship is not very good. Let's look at why things happen as they do. To start off, are you in charge of your life? Most adults they assume that they are, and that is completely wrong. When it comes to an emotionally charged situation, that's her territory, and she rules it with an iron fist. And because of what happened back in childhood, she believes she is unlovable and unworthy. And that distorts her reactions to situations that you have. Now, faced with an emotionally charged situation, she is going to assume that the situation will go badly because of what she believes about who she is. Her fears and anxieties will force her to create emotional distance from threats in an attempt to stay safe. She'll employ a myriad of strategies to avoid. She'll lie, she'll deny, confront, deceive, manipulate, etc., etc., etc. And this is regardless of what you would like. But realize that under the circumstances, she has little choice. So, what runs the most important part of your life will be an emotionally wounded and vulnerable 3 or maybe 6 year old who believes she is defective, and she has held those false beliefs since childhood. Now you got to remember, she is trapped. She is caught between the expectations of your world and what she's come to believe about herself. Okay. The thing to remember is that you are her only way out of this mess. So until you help her to heal, the beliefs she carries about herself will control the situation. Plus, if you have routinely abandoned her in order to appease others, the messages you give her, added to what she got in childhood, further convinces her that something is wrong with her. So, under the circumstances, she simply cannot deal with things straight on. That's just too great a risk. Now, understand, when you sell her out from her perspective, she is trapped. She's being forced into threatening situations by someone with little regard for her well being in a world of more powerful adults who threaten her existence. And without realizing it, you may be her biggest antagonist. And that means there'll be a split between the two of you. And remember, she's got the power to control things. And losing her trust and cooperation is a very expensive price to pay. And I can guarantee you that this ain't going to go well. I cannot calculate the cost to you of that split because, in addition to everything else, it just compounds her feelings of worthlessness. Because remember, when it comes down to it, it's her show.